And great to see you too, Dan.
Pleasure.
Шановні друзі, пані та панове, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues. My name is Daniel Lubkivsky and I address you from Kyiv. The Kyiv Security Forum continues a special online meetings called Fight for Ukraine. Here we discuss the ongoing Russia's war against our country, the heroic struggle of our armed forces, and the global support for Ukraine. This Monday, President Zelensky made a fresh appeal to our international partners for military aid. Ukraine prepares for apparently some of the heaviest fights with Russia in our east. There is already a new dangerous turn. Our authorities say that they are investigating a claim by our troops in the besieged city of Mariupol that they came under a Russian chemical weapon attack yesterday. Western officials have warned for weeks that Russia may use chemical weapons against Ukraine. When Mariupol fights back in the unbelievable fight against the Russian aggressor, the European Union approves the fifth package of sanctions that including the ban on coal. However, the European Union remains divided over whether to advance with further energy import bans, starting with oil. So, the picture is as follows. Russia continues its ugly and cynical, unprovoked war against Ukraine. Ukraine appeals for military aid and sanction supports. Ukraine remains strong and fights back. Putin sends clear messages that he will go further offensive. How to help Ukraine defend itself and finally defeat Putin? What are the most possible scenarios for future developments? How to increase pressure and strengthen international solidarity? These issues, these questions we are going to discuss tonight. And I'm glad to introduce our distinguished guests. First of all, I would like to start from 4-star General David Petraeus. I thank you, sir, for joining us. General Petraeus is former director of the United States Central Intelligence Agency and former commander of the United States Central Command in 2008 and 10, and former commander of the US and NATO troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. Ambassador Daniel Fried, our good friend and distinguished fellow of the Atlantic Council. Ambassador Fried was United States Department's coordinator for sanctions and former Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. And Arseniy Yatsenyuk, former Prime Minister of Ukraine and the chairman of the Kyiv Security Forum. So I wish to start from Prime Minister Yatsenyuk. Mr. Prime Minister, I invite you to share your views on how do you see the developments right now in Ukraine, and to share your opinion and assessment. You're welcome.
You know, my goal is to ask honorable and distinguished and noble figures like General Petraeus and Ambassador Fried to give their take how Ukraine is to win this war. Because Putin launched a barbaric Nazi-style war against Ukraine. He didn't achieve the goals that he said. He expected to take over Ukraine in a few days. But Ukrainian military, so courageous, so strong, and Ukrainian nations, well united, with the real will to defend our homeland, showed an enormous resilience. So now we expect one of the most bloodiest and decisive battles in the east of Ukraine. And I strongly believe that Ukrainian military will prevail. But what's at stake? At stake is the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of Ukraine. At stake is the freedom of the free world. So my appeal and actually what I am asking for of General Petraeus and Ambassador Fried, what is needed for Ukraine to win this battle in terms of military tools and in terms of financial and sanctions? We are very grateful to the United States, to the government of the United States, US administration, and American people, and bipartisan support to supply the defensive weapon for Ukraine, actually to orchestrate the unity among the EU member states and the United States, and to impose severe sanctions. So the biggest question for me is what is needed more from the United States in order to make Ukrainian military more durable and in order to win this bloody and decisive fight in the East, and how to avoid, how not to allow Russia to avoid sanctions that have been imposed by the United States and the European Union. Because we expect that the Russian economy is to fall by around 10%. But here is the thing. Ukrainian economy, in the best case scenario, is to go down by 50%. So it seems that we need to do more in order to cut off any kind of financial resources that finance actually the war machine of Nazi-style leader Putin. So this is the thoughts that I would like to share with noble, well-experienced, amazing representatives of the United States, which is General Petraeus and Ambassador Fried.
Mr. Prime Minister, I thank you for these questions, and I will go forward with them. I will elaborate on them, and let me start from General Petraeus. Thank you, sir, for being with us. We do appreciate. So, first of all, how do you assess major warfare developments from February till today? What's your general assessment?
Let me use this map to explain it. And to build on what the Prime Minister has said, and it's great to see you, by the way, Prime Minister, and always great to be back with Ambassador Fried. So Ukraine can obviously celebrate the victory that the Prime Minister referred to, the battles of Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy. In each case, you'll recall the Russians attacked south from Belarus to hit Kyiv in the north and try to get around to the west. They were stopped. They were halted. They also attacked from Russia north of Sumy and came in from the east and northeast and weren't able to get around either. And of course, they also were up around Chernihiv and around Sumy itself. Every one of those battles was won by Ukraine, which stopped those forces. But let's keep in mind the terrain in this area, because this becomes very important in contrast to what we will see in the east in the days and weeks ahead. This terrain is much more heavily wooded, and it is vastly more urban. And keep in mind that Kyiv, a city of, say, was maybe close to 3 million people, of course, very sprawling, 320 square miles. That's actually a larger area than New York's city's 300 square miles. So you have a lot of villages, you had a lot of built up areas from which defenders could fight. You had the same thing down in Mykolaiv, where a very courageous governor and military leader combined to stop the Russians cold. They came up out of Crimea, turned west. They wanted to get across the two bridges at Mykolaiv, across the river that it is on to get to Odessa, the most important port, obviously, for Ukraine, directly on the Black Sea. They didn't even get to Odessa because they were blocked at Mykolaiv. And now, of course, there's a counterattack there that could actually perhaps liberate Kherson, which, of course, is one of the first of the Ukrainian cities to actually be taken by the Russian forces. And that could be important because you need to create pressure on what is developing in the southeast in that area as well. They've also stopped the Russians roughly along here. They're not able to get to Zaporizhia or to Dnipro in that direction. The worry now, obviously, is what's going on in the southeast. Here you have Russian forces that are pushing south of Kharkiv down like this. They're coming in over here, and these salients, if you saw a blow up, we'll do that in a moment, can show you how threatening this could be. And then there's another pushing out of the separatist controlled areas of Donetsk, of course, as well. And tragically, when Mariupol, eventually, when the final incredible defenders there, we have described this, Prime Minister, as the Ukrainian Alamo, where each defender is fighting to the very end, as was the case in Texas at the Alamo 2 centuries ago, that those Russian forces there will then be able to turn north and reinforce the very modest hard-fought gains here. So what you'll have is a very valiant Ukrainian defenders in here, really stretching all around like that, and the Russians trying to penetrate anywhere they can, because once they get through, they can get into the rear of the other defenders. So this is a crucial moment. It is a very, very pivotal time for Ukraine, and I'll show this on this map again as well. The Russians obviously would like to take an area that would include all the way out to Dnipro, such an important rail and road hub, or at least Zaporizhia. I don't know about Kharkiv. What they're doing there is just keeping the keeping the Ukrainian forces pinned down that are defending there, so that they can't be brought down to reinforce those defending in the southeast. But you can see the push here, the push here, the push here. There's actually another one here, and then there will be pushes out of here as well. And these forces are essentially arrayed like this, the Ukrainian forces. So any penetration can allow you to get into the rear of the others, and perhaps they may also have visions of entrapping them in some fashion in that area. Now, one other very, very important reality here, and I've been to this area several years ago. I was down in the Donbass. I was in Kharkiv in addition to Kyiv, and saw the defenses down there. This is much more open terrain than was the terrain in the battles of Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy. Much less wooded terrain there. It's more rolling terrain. It's much more advantageous for the kind of massed armor forces. And we need to pray for rain, because we want the Russians to have to stay on the roads, as they had to stay on the roads up in, again, in the Kyiv area, because the minute they got off the roads, the soil was very, very moist, and they got mired with their wheeled vehicles, and even track vehicles found a difficult time. So this is what lies ahead. And of course, the Russians have been moving forces along here. And then you saw that 8-mile line of traffic that was picked up by Maxar satellite imagery and so forth. The advantage in this particular war of everyone having a smartphone and commercial satellite imagery available and so forth. So it gives you a sense of the challenge and of the fact that this is more advantageous terrain for massed armor forces, even those that have been so unable to achieve the combined arms effects of armor, infantry, artillery, and engineers working together, and then with close air support, either rotary or fixed wing, all of which has not been a hallmark of Russia so far. They've been quite inept at this. But in this case, you can just line up armored vehicles hub to hub and push, and it just becomes difficult to shoot them all in that time. So that's what lies ahead here. And I'll stop sharing this, and I want to talk a bit to answer the Prime Minister's questions. What can be done? Well, first of all, more of what we have provided, which the Ukrainians have shown tremendous skill in using. So it's the Javelin, the shoulder-launched guided missile system that is effective out to 2,500 meters. It's a fire and forget. It locks on the target and follows the target and can do a top-down attack. The Stinger, up to 10,000 feet, very effective guided missile anti-aircraft system. If we can get more of the Switchblade drones, this loitering munition that pops out, the blades open, and it then loiters for 15 or 30 minutes, depending on whether it's light or heavy, and then dives on the target selected by the operator, and it's quiet because it's electric, can be devastating, but we just don't have those in the arsenal, and the U.S. is desperately trying to produce more of those. More of the Eastern European weapons systems, ammunition, and supplies that can be immediately used by Ukrainian forces, because of course they are built around Eastern European, essentially old Warsaw Pact or even made in Ukraine, Soviet Union days models that have been modernized. So these are, again, the T-72 tanks, and Czech Republic has those. Let's get them into the country. S-300 air defense system, vitally important because it reaches above the range of the Stinger, which is 10,000 feet, coming in from Slovakia with the U.S. replacing that with Patriots. Multiple launch rocket systems wherever they may be, artillery, and keeping in mind that the artillery that can be used by Ukraine require 152 millimeter howitzer ammunition. We have 155. So this is the importance of scouring every Eastern European country that has systems that can be released to Ukraine immediately and then replaced over time by U.S. and Western systems. There are other U.S. Capabilities. The counterfire radar has been used very effectively by Ukraine. Secure communications, always a need for more of that. Body armor, Kevlar helmets, everything that soldiers need that can immediately be used and it requires no training. It might be time to use what's called the mine-resistant armor-protected vehicles. Some of the Ukrainian forces saw these that we used in Iraq. And again, not ideal for this because they're very high and they design resist improvised explosive devices on the road, but it's armor protection and better moving in that than it is moving in the soft skin vehicle. So perhaps some of that, even other items that might not occur that can actually help with defenses like bulldozers, scoop loaders, all of this, shove it in. As I said during the surge in Iraq, when we were desperately trying to achieve results, I said, just get it to us. If it won't kill somebody, if it doesn't work, let our soldiers use it, and then we'll figure out whether we want to keep it or just park it in a base somewhere and let it rust. And then there has to be, I think, an opening of the aperture to consider weapon systems that, yes, will take some degree of training, but not an enormous amount of training. And this is where we have to look across our arsenal of Western capabilities and ask what could be provided in that regard. Then finally, there have been very substantial sanctions imposed on the economy of Russia, the financial system, Putin's inner circle, and indirectly, in a sense, the business community, which has voluntarily, in some cases, in other cases, been compelled, drawn down what they're doing very substantially in Russia, in some cases, leaving completely the major oil companies and so forth. That none of that will have an immediate effect, but these should be strengthened. And the way to go at this now is to look at each major industry in Russia, ask what are the components of that? What are the factors of production? What does it need to be able to do what it is intended to do? And then sanction the supply chain of those individual industries. Again, this takes time. It takes research. The Deputy Secretary of State of the United States it has teams doing that. We've heard him speak about this publicly, and we need to accelerate that particular process. Finally, there's just an awful lot of general provision of humanitarian assistance, both inside Ukraine and for the well over 4 million, I guess approaching 5 million refugees who have had to leave Ukraine, and then the 5 or more million within Ukraine as well, that we need to help them in every way and just help those who are staying in Ukraine to withstand all of the ravages of war and survive during these very, very pivotal battles that lie ahead.
Right. General, I do thank you, sir. Thank you for this analysis and for this picture. And here, before we get to Ambassador Fried to speak about the sanctions, let me also ask you a few other questions that I believe are important for the Ukrainian audience and for general understanding. Today, Putin had a press conference with his Belarusian ally, and they lied. I mean, complete liars. They said that everything was all right, everything goes according to their plans, and this is not true. They lie. So what do you think? Why Putin did underestimate Ukraine? And do you think he has a potential to make a breakthrough in his military offensive against Ukraine, in his war against Ukraine?
First of all, I think that it's hard for someone who is as cold, ruthless, calculating, who seems unconcerned by the fact that probably as many as 18 or 19,000 Russians have been killed in a little over 2 months of fighting. This is, again, this is 4 times what we lost in 20 years of war in Iraq. And we had tough weeks, particularly when I was privileged to command the surge. The first 6 months were very, very hard. So someone like that, I think, can't appreciate how significant the commitment of an individual can be to his or her country. That Ukrainians are willing to die for their country, that they are fighting for the nation's survival. And of course, that they're doing it on their soil. And he also completely underestimated how much Ukraine has progressed since 2014 in the seizure of Crimea and the separatist supported areas of the Donbass in professionalizing their forces. He doesn't realize the value of individual initiative. You know, your forces are actually exemplifying what we sought to encourage in Iraq. We had a saying that was, in the absence of orders, figure out what they should have been and execute aggressively. That's what we wanted young soldiers, young leaders, non-commissioned and commissioned officers to do on their own. That's completely contrary to the approach of the Russian forces, which really are the children of the Soviet forces, that they didn't do anything unless they're told to do so by those above them. There's no professional non-commissioned officer corps. The communications have broken down. Your citizens, again, are engaged in this. They're scanning for the Russian communications. They record them to show how ruthless and cold-blooded they are, how they are promoting, actually saying, just kill them all, bragging about what they're doing, filming what they're doing, and so forth. And then they jam those communications, which forces the battalion, brigade commanders, and then the generals to go up to the front to find out what's going on, to give instructions. And of course, you have very skilled snipers who are trained by American Special Forces and those of other agencies. So again, he just can't get this. I don't think he understands at all. But now let's look at the Southeast. Let's look at the terrain. Let's look at the sheer mass of what Russia has. And we have to appreciate the enormous need to slow them down and to stop them. I've obviously, spent 37 years in uniform, and we trained on how do you stop a large force. I mean, my first 25 years or so in uniform, we're all focused on how are we going to stop the Warsaw Pact force that outnumbers us 3-1 in artillery, 3-1 in tanks, and 2-1 in infantry fighting vehicles. I can obviously still remember those numbers. That's what is going to be the task of Ukrainian forces in southeastern Ukraine. And again, getting them every item that can help with that. And by the way, this is where, again, Ukrainian forces were so creative, north and east and west, actually, of Kyiv. I mean, they'd just block roads with vehicles, with refuse, with wrecks of Russian tanks and so forth. What you've got to do is stop them, slow them down, and then pick them off, obviously, with javelins, with artillery. You've used drones very effectively, as well as forward observers. That's going to be, and your forces know this, your commanders know this, they've already demonstrated an ability to do it, but in terrain that is more favorable, now they're going to have to figure out how to do that in terrain that is less favorable to the defense, and in some ways more favorable to what the Russians have been able to mass, which is just sheer quantity, not necessarily quality, and the Ukrainians are going to have to demonstrate once again their enormous capability and their sheer determination and relentless will not to give up an inch of Ukrainian soil to the Russian invaders.
Great. Sir, and we all understand that Ukraine has this ability and capacity to stop and to defeat Putin. So this is something even more than only our weapons or skills, but the desire and the spirit of the Ukrainians that fights back. And this is a very important feeling for every Ukrainian. But also what is important for Ukraine is further Western support. What kind of conclusions can you draw for the West if we talk about Russia's war against Ukraine? What do you think? Does the West understand what's going on? Can the West help Ukraine more? What should be done more?
Well, I think the West does understand what's going on. I think it is correct as the U.S. administration, and this is bipartisan support. This is an issue in a country that has its political divisions, but this issue is one in which everyone is united, and that is to help Ukraine. This is a battle between authoritarianism and democracy. About East versus West. And again, I think there's great clarity on that issue. And again, we got to do it. You take every single area in which you can advance support for Ukraine, you tear it apart, you figure out what more can be done. What is it that is holding up the transfer of this particular item to Ukraine from either US, UK, NATO countries, or especially Eastern Europe, and then figure out how to resolve those. And you've just got to be relentless in your pursuit of answers to those questions, so that, again, everything humanly possible can be provided to the defenders in this case. Let me add one other comment. I was an invader. It helps to have invaded a country to evaluate how another country is doing invading a country. I was a two-star general when we invaded Iraq. It was all about logistics. It was all about positioning of forces. It was all about setting up the enablers for that infantryman who first makes contact. The Russians have basically failed in almost all of those different tasks. But most of all, the difference between us invading Iraq and the Russians invading Ukraine is that we truly were applauded. Let's not remember that, because we all remember what happened when elements of Iraq turned against us for a variety of reasons, some of which were self-inflicted policy decisions. But when we entered Iraq, not just the Shia Arabs, but also the Sunni Arabs and the Kurds all applauded, because everyone hated the kleptocratic regime led by Saddam Hussein and his murderous sons. They cheered in the Sunni Arab areas when the 101st Airborne Division, again, which I was privileged to command, killed Uday and Qusay after they refused to be detained. Over time, yes, we had our problems, and some of those, again, were a result of some policy decisions. But I cannot imagine invading a country in which everyone in that country hates the invader. So put yourself in the shoes of the Russians and think about how difficult this is for them, and what an enormous source of strength it is for Ukraine. And here I think that you have to recognize that President Zelensky has been Churchillian in his determination of the big ideas. You know, strategic leaders have to get 4 tasks right. They got to get the big ideas right. They have to communicate them effectively. They have to oversee their implementation, and they have to determine how to refine them so they can do them again and again and again. I mean, his very big ideas from the very beginning: I'm not leaving Kyiv. I don't want to ride. I want ammunition. My family's going to stay here with me. You know, just on and on. He's got the big ideas right. He has communicated them brilliantly, with a special nuance for each country's legislature or parliament when he's addressed it, to the Ukrainian people, to the Western world, and so forth. Again and again, he's done that relentlessly. He's overseen the implementation. The way the government is, I mean, it's much more than President Zelensky, obviously. I mean, the former prime minister knows there's all these deputies and prime ministers and others that are all actually engaged in a collective effort to target their respective area of responsibility. And then there seems to be this capacity to determine, how do we need to refine this now and do it again and again and again. And again, whatever you think of how the government was doing prior to this, and I know obviously there were areas in which there was something to be desired, I think it's very, very hard to criticize and to do anything but actually to praise and to admire what has been done since the invasion.
Thank you, General. We also hope that there is also the 5th element, which is Western support. And I pray and hope that the West will never waste a minute to help Ukraine defend itself. What is needed right now: weapons, weapons, and more weapons. And I hope that you can pass this message to your colleagues and to your experts. And on final note, just a brief element of a difficult question, but taking into account your experience. What do you think? What this cynical, unjust war would mean, not only for the world, for Ukraine, but what it will mean for Russia? What kind of impact do you think it may have on Russia?
Well, I think it has a devastating impact on Russia, but it takes some time for us to see that, because unfortunately, Russia is ideally set up to withstand, to survive the kinds of enormous economic, financial, business community, and inner circle sanctions that have been imposed. because it's one of the top three producers of natural gas, oil, and coal. And for all of our efforts to dissuade countries from buying that, there are countries inevitably that will be compelled to buy that for a variety of different reasons, some of them much less noble than others. Their actual current account surplus, their trade surplus, is actually going to be higher, unfortunately, because crude oil prices have gone up during this period as a result of other phenomenon, the return of demand more rapidly than the return of supply in the post-pandemic period. But the bottom line is that in this case, it will take time for those sanctions to really bite on other than the average Russian citizen. So tragically, once again, these kinds of sanctions hurt those who are most fragile in their economic circumstances rather than those who are obviously the oligarchs, although they're not going to have access to their yachts, their planes, their Mayfair real estate in London and in their homes in southern France. But this has to be devastating to Russia, at least for as long as Vladimir Putin or someone similar to Vladimir Putin remains at the head table in the Kremlin.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time and for your participation. The Kyiv Security Forum highly appreciates your views, your opinion, and your contribution and your support of Ukraine. All Ukrainians do that. And now I turn to Ambassador Fried and Excellency, pardon me and apologies for waiting so long, but we are going to have another interesting part of our discussion. Excellency, what do you think about what's your assessment of the situation on the ground in Ukraine and how do you see the picture?
Everything that General Petraeus said, I agree with. First of all, my conclusion is that we don't know how the next battle will turn out. We don't know how this war will end. Now, consider that. Russia attacks Ukraine, and we don't know whether they can prevail. They might. And I think General Petraeus did a wonderful job of explaining the Russian plans and the Ukrainian vulnerabilities. But we don't know that the Russians will succeed. The Biden administration was absolutely spot on and predicted Putin's decision to invade Ukraine. Unfortunately, they were right. But fortunately, they were wrong about the way the military campaign would unfold. The U.S. seems to have predicted that the Russians would be in Kyiv within 72 hours, and we know what happened. They weren't. That's a very big deal. Now, if the battle is in doubt, that means, as General Petraeus said, and he said it well, we need to be leaning forward and giving the Ukrainians as many weapons as we can to help them successfully defend their country. Right? So that's, much will depend on the battlefield. And President Zelensky has said repeatedly that all wars end with negotiations. Well, Putin isn't serious about negotiations. I doubt he was serious. Maybe some of his people were, but I don't think he was. In any negotiations to end the war will reflect the situation on the ground. So we ought to lean forward, and I thought General Petraeus's recommendations were spot on. It's military support in the first place, but that's not the only piece. That's not the only policy the West, the U.S. and Europe need to be leading on. We have imposed serious sanctions on Russia. We've done a good job. There's more to do, and we need to do it. And we need to do it fast. All right. I think the sanctions have been good. The single strongest sanction was locking down over 50% of Russia's hard currency reserves, doing that over a weekend, locking down about $350 billion worth of reserves before they could move it out. That was well done. That was serious. That wasn't just the United States. That was the G7. And they did it very quickly. I suspect this all came together within about 36 hours. Some of the other financial sanctions have been good. And don't forget, people don't pay quite enough attention to the export controls. But the U.S. invoked an obscure sounding rule to try to prohibit the export, worldwide export, of semiconductors to Russia. Now, that is a big blow to Russian production. I have heard reports, and I have heard I've been confirmed for me that these are accurate, that Russian production in automobiles and even Russian production of tanks has been damaged by a shortage of chips. I've been told by the administration that this is true. So the sanctions have been strong. However, sanctions take time to work. And if Putin wants to achieve enough of a battlefield victory to claim a sort of success by May 9th, which I find likely, then the next weeks will be critical. It's not enough to pat ourselves on the back, we Americans and the Europeans, about all we've done with sanctions. We need to be forward-leaning. So where do we go? Where do we increase? Well, in sanctions, as in policy generally, follow the money. Where's the money? Oil exports are the biggest hard currency export earner for Russia. Those earnings have gone up because of the price of oil. Gas is number two. Right now, the Europeans and Americans are wrestling with the options for curtailing Russian exports of oil. It's not easy. It is possible, I believe. I've been having some very interesting conversations with the German government. They're thinking through various options. The trick, sometimes the Ukrainians talk about a full embargo of oil and gas. Look, that's great if it could happen. But I want to see cutbacks on Russian income as much as possible. I will applaud any serious lowering of Russian export earnings. And there are various ways to get at Russian oil sales. The Germans are already beginning to talk of being able to stop buying Russian oil by the end of the year. The Poles and Lithuanians have said the same thing. The Poles and Lithuanians have talked about an end to purchases of Russian natural gas. The Germans are less confident of their ability to do it. But in oil, the Germans may be moving. And there are various ways to approach this. You could do a ban. You could do a high tariff. A high tariff, given the economics behind oil sales, a high tariff would weaken Russian income from sales of oil, even if those sales remain. And I'm for anything that lowers the amount of money flowing into Putin's coffers. Moreover, in addition to just Europe, the United States has already stopped purchases of Russian oil, but that's easy for us because we're a net energy exporter. In addition to stopping European or curtailing European purchases of Russian oil, we could invoke one of the sanctions from the Iran sanction system and impose secondary sanctions for any country in the world that was buying Russian oil, but waive those sanctions if it significantly reduced those purchases every 6 months or every 3 months. You could do it. I'm interested less in purity than in hitting Russian income. I want to take a whack at it. I want it to be lower. I want their economy to hurt. All right?
Thank you, sir. Excellency, if I may clarify just a
Go
single
ahead.
thing, since I'm in Kyiv and I believe I would share the question that can be raised by anyone who lives here or anywhere in Ukraine. We talk about time. and people ask this question, very simple question. We definitely understand how it works with the weapons, but we don't understand how long will it take for the sanctions to work and to make this goal happen, as you said, to lower the income, to undermine the economic potential which is used by Putin's regime in the military aims and against Ukraine and the West and the civilized international community. So, I mean, this is a general question,
Yep.
but
Yep.
every man and woman would ask it. I mean, how long? How long do you think it may take?
The sanctions, the freezing of Russian foreign exchange in the West, the $350 billion, that's happened, that's done. Russia is probably going to go into a default. To answer the question of speed, I would go after, the first thing I would do was take a hit at Russia's ability to export oil. I would do that just as fast as we could. I would do that as fast as we could. Now, I wouldn't wait one bit. The Germans have been thinking about this. We need to have an understanding with the Germans, and I'd rather not debate it. If speed is the issue, and I find it, I find that's a powerful argument, then I would work with the Germans on as fast a basis as I could, come up with a common position, and implement it quickly. I think that Ukrainian pressure is a good idea. I think that's important. And I think that the Germans are thinking about this. Remember, the chancellor is a social democrat. The president is a social democrat, but the economics ministry is in the hands of the Greens. The Greens have been forward-leaning for years in pushing back against Putin's Russia and Putin's aggression. These are solid people. And I think the econ ministry is looking at this issue in good faith. So, or I would do oil just as fast as possible. Now, there are other sanctions we could implement, but if the objective is to lower Putin's income and reduce his resources to conduct this war and maybe other wars, go follow the money, go after the oil exports, then do gas as best you can. There's some other things we could do. I mean, there's a long list I could go through. But in terms of speed, you want to hit oil quickly.
Right. Excellency, and I also received a question from our audience regarding the sanctions. People want to understand how this machinery works. And the question is very simple. How reliable is that mechanism that verifies if the sanctions work? So if there is any kind of bypass of the sanctions, since we understand that even the sanctions are imposed, there could be a possibility that they do not simply work, or there are some compromises around around the implementation. What do you think? How should how can we rely on this?
The question's a good one. Sanctions are not 100%. There will always be some slippage. But the issue is not, let's take the issue of oil, okay? The biggest hard currency earner for the Russian economy. There's always going to be some slippage. There will always be some sales that go through. And, it may be that the most practical sanction is a rapid ramp down of sales rather than a complete 100% cutoff. And the Russians will cheat. However, the issue is not whether it's 100%. The issue is, how much money can you take out of Putin's pocket and the pockets of the Russian, the Russian state? The objective is to lower that figure, to put pressure, financial and economic pressure on Russia while the arms are flowing to Ukraine. And it's a question of how much you can do, how fast you can do. Look, I'm an old man. I spent many years doing policy. Policy is not pure. Impure policy can have really good results. All right. I don't look for perfection. I look for doing enough to get where you want to be. And I want to hit them. Okay. I want to hit them as hard as we can. And if I have to make some deal with the European, if I were in my old job and had to make a deal with the European Union or with the Germans that was less than perfect, but got me, a ways down the road to where I want to be, which is to hit Putin's economy, I'd do it. Okay? I would do it.
Right.
The objective here is to hit them as fast as we can, as much as we can, economically. It's not perfect. But where's the Soviet Union today? We hit them. The trouble is, you're right. Ukraine is under attack right now, and that attack is likely to intensify. So we in the West have to act at a wartime with a decision pace of wartime, not peacetime.
Right. Great point. Excellency, I do thank you very much for these remarks. And I believe Prime Minister Yatsenyuk would like to make some concluding points. You're welcome, sir.
Well, I am very grateful to you, General Petraeus, and to you, Ambassador Fried. You've done a lot for your countries, and you've done a lot for Ukraine. What I strongly believe in the global justice. I strongly believe that we are to prevail and win this war. I strongly believe that Ukraine already defended itself, and we are ready to defend the free world. And I believe that the free world realized that Ukraine is at the forefront of this righteous fight. We need to get defensive and offensive lethal weapon on the fast track. The world is to turn the screw and to ramp up sanctions every single day, 24/7, in order, what Ambassador Fried said, to hit the Russian economy, to undermine this war, aggressive, barbaric machine that waged the war against Ukraine. So we will prevail.
We will prevail. I thank you all, gentlemen. Pray for Ukraine. Pray for Mariupol. Ukraine stands strong, and Ukraine will stand strong forever. Stand with Ukraine. I thank you. Дуже дякую. I thank you.
Дуже дякую.
Thank you.
Що
Thank
не
you.
вмерла Україна. Слава